Hello, I'm Mrs H. You can find my patterns at www.mrs-h.com. Today's video we're going to be sewing the Project Manager Open Top Tote. It's a bit of a mouthful. So as the name suggests, this tote is completely open at the top. You could add a closure, you could add a magnetic snap or a zip closure if you like, but this bag has been designed to carry your files and folders and books and things to and from meetings or on the bus, on the train, to school, college, whatever it is that you need this bag for. It's a beginner friendly pattern. As said, there's no closure in the top. There is a basic zip pocket inside in case you need to carry any personal items with you. There are exposed boxed corners in the bottom. Now these are dead simple to do, but I will talk you through how to do every step of this bag, of this pattern, and every technique included, because they look very impressive and you can use them on any bag. The bag's got a two-tone strap, so there's two different fabrics on this strap. I've designed it at a set length, but if you want to change it for an adjustable strap or a longer or shorter strap, you absolutely can. The pattern talks you through how to do this two-tone strap, although you could use the same fabric on both sides. So the bag is designed to carry files and folders and things. So I've got here a few different things. Let me turn it around so it doesn't fall over. I've got my book, which you can see fits quite nicely in there. I've got a printout of this pattern, which fits quite nicely in there as well. Hang on, let me do it this way so you can see. And also I've got a folder which is slightly bigger than printer paper, so that you can see how that fits as well. Quite nice in there. Plenty of space at the top if you do want to add a closure. Now I've made this one out of faux leather, and I've made my second one out of canvas with a nice floral lining. They're exactly the same, the only difference is the materials. There's very little stabilizer in this, so this is a nice slouchy bag. If you want to pop this in your suitcase or briefcase or take it with you anywhere, it will fold up really nice and neat. It's just a really lovely alternative to that basic canvas bag that we all tend to put our files in when we're in a rush. So having a dedicated bag for your files, that's the idea of this. My testers have used this pattern as a springboard. So some of them have embroidered, some of them have done patchwork, quilting, all sorts of different bits and pieces, just to use this as a blank canvas and adapt the pattern. So there's lots of potential here, but if you gather your supplies together, we'll get started sewing, because I really enjoyed making this and I hope you will too. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take our piece of stabilizer, and I've just folded mine in half lengthwise, so it's 15 inches wide. Smooth it down so that it's matching nicely. Don't worry if you've cut it a little bit wonky like me. Just ignore that. Okay, so we're going to be working on the end that's got the fold. Okay, so this is folded in half. We're working on this bottom end. We're going to cut some corners into these layers. All I'm going to do is place my ruler on this bottom corner to where it needs to be, and I'll see if I can do it in pencil. Yeah, so I'm just drawing my squares in the bottom corners there. Turn it around so I can do it on this side as well. And the measurements for these are in your pattern. Okay, so I'll just draw this one as well, and then we're going to cut through both layers, and I'll show you what it looks like after. So if you're a bit nervous that you might not have it quite right, hang on till I've cut mine and then I'll unfold it and show you. So I'm just cutting from the folded edge all the way up. Just cut these squares out. Don't worry if you're not 100% accurate. It will all be okay. Okay. So actually what we've cut is a rectangle, isn't it? But it looks like a square because we've got it folded in half. So our stabiliser piece will look like this. So it'll have these two corner cutouts, one on either side. Okay, so you can pop that to one side for the minute. Our stabiliser's ready to apply to our exterior when we're ready for it. And grab hold of your two exterior pieces. Okay, now pay attention to the direction of these pieces. If you haven't got directional fabric, you've got plain fabric like me, just make sure that you are having them, or you know, when you're working with them, you're keeping them at 15 inches wide, because there's only an inch difference in the width versus the height. So just make sure that you've got them 15 inches wide. If you are working in metric, let me tell you what that is. If you're working in metric, then that is 38 centimetres wide. So all we're going to do is lay these on top of each other, lining up our raw edges, make sure it's nice and even. And we are just going to sew along the bottom seam for the minute. Going to ignore the rest of it. Just going to sew the bottom seam. We're going to use our regular seam allowance, which is 3/8 of an inch in this pattern. And we're going to use our regular stitch length. So on my machine, goes up to a 6, and I'll use around a 2.5, maybe a 3 for this one. Okay, I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. So the seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch is 1 centimetre in metric. Now you've got the option here, it depends how bouncy your fabric is. If your fabric is not very bouncy, you can just press these open and then top stitch after you've added the stabiliser. But if your fabric is really bouncy, you're going to want to top stitch before you add the stabiliser, otherwise there's no way these seam allowances are going to stay open. Right, let me give these a little press. I'm not sure how bouncy my canvas is, but we'll give it a go. My vinyl was very, very bouncy, so I top stitched before I added my stabiliser, just to make sure that these stay open. Well, these are staying open lovely, so I might add my stabiliser first and then top stitch on this version. But then you've got both versions to follow, haven't you? Because you've got it in the pattern where I've top stitched before adding stabiliser, and then after in this video. Okay, so if you are using something that's really bouncy and you can't press them and they don't stay open, then all you need to do is just pop this under the machine and finger press this open, and then top stitch either side of the seam 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil away from that seam. And I like to do it actually on this side, because you can make sure that that seam allowance is really nice and open. But if you can press your fabric, then do press it open, and we'll apply the stabiliser. Right, so what we need now is our centre marks on this stabiliser. So make sure it's folded in half, and we'll just add a little centre mark. That's not going to show up on the video. Let me try it and see. Just want to make sure that you can see what I'm doing on the video. Doesn't show up very well. Let me try a pen. That's a little bit better. Okay, so just mark the centres of your stabiliser, and then we're just going to line this up on our centre seam like so. Make sure you've got it lined up nicely on the width as well. So don't worry, as I said, if it's a little bit wonky, it doesn't matter too much. Just give it a nice smooth out A few extra little stray threads there. So I am going to, I'm going to clip this, I think. Add a few clips just to hold it in place while we're working with it. My table's a little bit small to have this laid out all the way. So just smooth it out however you need to get it to the edges. It should be the same size. Doesn't matter if it's slightly bigger, as long as you make sure that you're keeping accurate seam allowances. And if it's slightly too small, don't worry too much. Mine is slightly too short in this top corner, but this fleece stretches quite nicely, so you can just kind of smooth it out. What I normally do is I kind of drag my nails along it to encourage it to smooth out. Okay, might have added a few too many clips there, but at least it's not going anywhere. Okay, so I'll clip this side as well. So make sure again, or still, that your center marks on your fleece where you folded it are in line with the seam allowance, or the seam, sorry, that we've just sewn, the bottom seam. I'll smooth this out as well. Smooth it out that way as well. That's not, needs a little bit of encouragement to reach that side there. I think I might have done a bit of wonky cutting here. Either that or when I cut off my roll previously, did a bit of wonky cutting then. Let me see if I can get this a bit straighter. I would like to say that I've done it, cut it wonky deliberately to show you that everybody cuts slightly wonky sometimes. I can't say that. But it does prove it, doesn't it? Right, okay, I think that's as good as I'm going to get. Okay, so now we're going to sew this into place, and we're not going to sew around these corner cutouts. So we're just going to sew along the straight edge, along the top, and along this side edge. And then the same on the other side, along this straight edge, along the top and that side edge there. I'm going to use a basting stitch, so that's the longest stitch on my machine, which is a number 6, and I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That is a 6mm seam allowance if you're working in metric. If your fleece doesn't quite meet that seam allowance, don't panic too much, just do the best you can, and it will be held in place by everything anyway. You don't need to back stitch at the start and the end because we're just basting this into place. Okay, so at the corner I've stopped with my needle down, lifted my presser foot, pivot, and then I can carry on the next side. And then the same on this side. Okay, so I'm not sewing around the corner cutouts, I'm just going to move on to the second half. that's attached nicely. Now, if you haven't done your top stitching either side of the seam, like me, then now is the time to do it. So we'll change our stitch length back down. I'm changing my stitch length to my top stitching length, which on mine is just slightly longer than my piecing stitch length, and I'm sewing 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from that seam. I'm going to sew on the right side for this one because I can, because my seam allowances are already held down. Okay, so that's one side. Now I'm going to turn around and go back the other side as well. I'm doing the full length, including where the stabilizer is not. Now I've chosen a really well matched thread, which is great for it blending in and not being obvious, especially if I sew a bit wonky, but not so good for you to see on the camera. So I'll just tell you that I have sewn both sides of that seam. Okay. So we've got our fleece attached. We just need to trim this extra fleece out of the seam allowance. So all we do is just pull the exterior layer back, and I like to hold my scissors at a sort of nearly horizontal angle, and I just whiz along and trim this excess fleece out of the seam allowance. And this will just reduce the bulk that's in those seam allowances. That will give you a nice neat finish. Your seams won't be sort of trying to turn inwards on themselves when you've got it turned out the right way. I don't need to do these corner cutouts because we've already kept it well away from the corner cutouts. Just doing the sides and bottom, sides and top edges. Oh, I've snipped through my stitches there. Sure, that'll be fine because we'll catch this in our seam as well when we sew our side seam. Basting stitches are really just there to, oh hang on, I don't want to lose it off the end. They're just there to hold it in place while we're working with it, really, while we're doing this construction. Now if you have got a not a very strong machine, what you can also do is when you're trimming this fleece, you can also trim a little bit away from these top corners as well, just a little notch out of about 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters, and that will reduce the bulk when you come to sew the side seams and you come to sew the lining into the exterior, or the exterior into the lining. It will reduce the bulk in those top corners. So if your machine does struggle with thicknesses, that's a handy little tip there. Right, there we go. It's a bit long-winded that, but it does make a difference. Okay, so we've got our fleece attached, or our stabilizer attached. We've got our main panels sewn together along the bottom. The next thing we're going to do is make a mark on the wrong side of the exterior panels, and I'm going to mark them 2 inches or 5 centimeters from the seam. So just line your ruler up, and they just need to be within the seam allowance is fine. Just going to give us an indication of where to fold for our box corners. That's all. Okay, and this one as well. Okay, right. Now don't panic that my marks are further away from my fleece than yours might be. If you're using a cotton, then your marks should be in line with the cutouts from the fleece. Okay, mine is a thicker canvas, so I've kept mine out of that little corner there. Okay, let me check I haven't forgotten anything before we go on to boxing the corners. No. Okay, great. So first thing we're going to do is fold it, so turn it right sides up, and we're going to fold our panel along those marks that we've just made, that first set of marks. So I'll fold it and then I'll turn it around to show you from your point of view. Okay. Okay. So you can see there I've got my marks that I made, and I'm just folding there. I'm going to pop a clip in there just to hold it flat so it doesn't move around while I'm working with it. I'm showing you. And then that second mark, just flatten that out on the side as well. Now don't press this because you don't want a crease along there. You just want to sort of smooth it out to make sure there's no ruckles or anything, and it's nicely in place. Okay, now what we're going to do is flip this panel over, and we're going to do exactly the same but along the second set of marks. Okay, so what you can do is just pinch that side together along that mark, so with that mark in the center of the pinch, and clip it. And the same on this side, pinch it and clip it, and then bring this down to meet that first set of marks that we did. Okay, don't worry too much if it ruckles up slightly, you can smooth it out, but what we should end up with is those two marks meeting on the folds there. And they do. So I'm going to transfer my clip and I'll show you what it looks like inside. So we've got a sort of a I don't know, an M shape or a W shape depending on which way you're looking at it, almost a concertina sort of fold there with those two marks lined up. Now smooth these seam allowances down. Don't worry too much about all the other seam allowances, as long as this side seam allowance is nice and smooth, then that's what we want. So I'm going to smooth from the bottom and clip and smooth as I go, and then those two top corners, if they don't quite meet, don't panic, just make sure that everything is nice and smooth so that it's not pulled skew-iff. Okay, so on this second side then, so I've got my two marks clipped, and I'm just going to bring those together to match and add a little clip, and then smooth that down. And then smooth along this side seam again, same as we did before. Don't worry too much if this seam's a little bit bulky or a little bit not quite right, as long as we're straight and flat and matching on the sides, that's all that really matters at this point. The rest will all come good. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to sew along both sides of the exterior, and I'm going to sew from the bottom to the top, because then that makes sure that these bottom folds don't move, they don't shift around. Okay, if you're not confident, you can always add a little basting hand stitch just in the bottom there to keep those layers together, but we're going to sew from the bottom to the top through all of the layers. We're going to use our regular seam allowance and our regular stitch length. I'm going to start on this side, because that's the side I'm on. I'll take this clip out, but make sure that those layers don't move. So pinch them together until you get them under your presser foot. And I'm going to start with my needle down. I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. Now I'm just back stitching over that folded bit as well inside, just to give it a bit of extra strength. Okay, so I've sewn all the way up to the top there. Then I'm going to flip this panel over so that I can start again at this bottom corner. So I'm just pinching those bottom corners together to make sure they don't move around. Pop them under the presser foot, starting my needle down. One little back stitch over one little bit of back stitch over where it is folded. Okay, now just double checking along here that I have not gone the wrong side of my basting stitches, because otherwise my basting stitches will show on the outside of the bag. Nope, that looks pretty good to me. Okay, now you can just put this to one side without looking at it, but if you want to have a little look at it, then feel free to just turn it out and have a little look, and you can see the magic of these exposed boxed corners. Look great, don't they? Okay. If they look like they're a bit caught up, don't panic. It's just a case of unfolding all the layers and smoothing it out. Okay. Great. Now, I think I am going to leave that right sides out, but I'm actually going to leave my side seams clipped open just to reduce a bit of bulk when I come to sew these in. Make sure those seams sit nice and open. You can press your seam allowances open at this point if you'd like to. It's probably easier if you do it from the inside, but I'm just going to leave those clipped. All right, so we can pop our exterior to one side for the minute. That looks great already. You could get a real sense of how this bag is going to look already just from that bit. Okay, so I'll put that down there. Now we are going to work on our handle next. So get your handle pieces and your rings, and then we'll start working on our handle. Okay, so this is how to sew a two-tone handle. So you'll have one fabric on one side of the handle and a different fabric on the other side of the handle, like so. And you'll see no exposed edges, no raw edges at all. And you can do this with any kind of strap where you're attaching rings or strap anchors or strap tabs to. The only thing you can't use this on is an adjustable strap. So any fixed length strap you can do in this way. So what we're going to do first is your strap needs to be twice the width of your hardware and whatever your desired length. So I've got two pieces and my hardware is 1 inch. So I'm using two pieces that are 2 inch or 2.5 centimeters and 5 centimeters if you're working in metric. The first thing we're going to do is, they're both the same length, I should say. So first thing we're going to do is place these one on top of the other, and we're just going to sew along one short end of the straps using our regular seam allowance. I'm just going to add a little clip to help me keep those in line as I go. And I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end of this. I'm using my regular stitch length. Okay, now we just need to press this seam open. So go ahead and open that out and give it a little press. Just make sure that the ends are really nice and neat on your finished strap. Okay, now we're going to draw a line down the centre of our strap pieces. So on my strap it's 2 inches wide, so my line is going to be 1 inch in, so that'll make it in the centre. And I'm just going to use a pencil so that you can see, but you would want to use something that will be easily removed or rub away or fade away, or something like that. So I'm just going along the whole length of my strap, both pieces. And I'm doing this after sewing my seam so that I can also draw over my seam allowances. Okay, and on to the second piece. So it doesn't matter which 2 pieces of fabric you use. You can use 2 pieces of fabric the same colour, but I think it's quite nice to have a bit of a contrast. So on mine I've got my exterior fabric and my lining fabric, and I'm using both. Okay, now I'm going to get my rectangle rings and I'm going to thread them onto the handle, both of them. So you can just fold your handle and thread them both on. Okay, and then making sure it's not twisted, we're going to bring, let me pull it this way a bit so you can see the full length of it. Going to bring the unsewn short ends together, so make sure it's not twisted. Bring these short ends together and we are going to sew this seam the same as we did before, so same seam allowance and same stitch length. Okay, and then I'm going to give this a little press to make sure that this seam is open, nice and neat, same as the first one. Now if your fabric can't be pressed, don't panic too much. Just give it a good finger press. You can tape it down if you want, if that will hold for you. Okay. Right, now if you want to, you can press this first, but I tend to not press it. I tend to just do it. So starting, you can just ignore these rectangle rings on there at the minute, okay. Starting at one seam, fold the long edge into that centre line, and we're going to fold and sew as we go. So we're going to sew this at 1/4 inch seam allowance, or 6mm seam allowance if you're in metric. I'm going to sew all the way around the loop, just folding as we go, folding as we go. Move these rectangle rings as you go, just move them out of the way. We're going to sew all the way around that entire loop. So I'm using my whichever stitch length you want to top stitch with. So if you use the same stitch length, then that's fine. If you want to use a slightly longer stitch length, then change it up now. Whatever you use, just remember that for when we do the final enclosing stitches. So I'm going to start with my needle down so that if I need to move my hands around, I can. My strap is not going to go anywhere. And I'm just going to do 2 back stitches so that my stitching is secured, but I haven't got loads and loads of extra stitch in there. So as I go around this strap, I'm just going to be folding this long edge into the centre and sewing at my 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance. Right, so I'm back at the start of my loop. So I've sewn all the way around on one side. Now I'm going to do the same on the other side, and I'm going to start at the second seam. So I started here on this seam, but I'm going to start on the second seam so that I'm going the same from the exterior first onto the lining. You probably don't need to do that. It's probably a me quirk, but that's what I like to do. So I'm doing it exactly the same as I did before, just bringing this in to meet that first folded edge in the centre. Right, so at this point we've treated both fabrics the same, but now it's time to decide which one you want to be on the outside of your strap, only just from a top stitching point of view. Now I'm just trimming up my threads here. I'm using canvas, which does like to fray slightly. So I'm just trimming a few of these extra threads off, and from my starting as well. Okay, lovely. Right, so now what we need to do is decide which one you want to be right sides out, or the outside of your strap. To be honest, if you're using swivel clips, it doesn't really matter, but I'm using rectangle rings on this strap, so it does matter to me. Now my rings have got a seam on one of their edges, so that's what I'm going to have as my inside ring. If you have got the same, you can just swivel them around. Okay, so I'm going to position one ring directly under that first seam and just sort of finger roll it so that it's nice and even. And then I'm going to add a little clip just to hold it in place. And then I'm also going to do the same on the other end. So give that a nice little finger roll. You've got a bit of bulk in these seams, don't forget, so just give them a little finger roll to help them sit in place. And add a little clip there as well, just hold it in place. Now, if you started off with the same length strap and your seams were accurate on each end, these should be perfectly the same length. For some reason that doesn't always work. So just even this out, and if they're not quite the same length, then I would recommend starting from the middle and evening it out so that you've got the same difference on either end. So if your exterior fabric, for example, is, I don't know, an inch longer at this point, something firstly would have gone wrong, but if if it is, then I would recommend having the seam half an inch on the inside of each strap on each end so that it looks intentional rather than it looks like something's gone wrong. But I am finding that on mine, although it looks like it's not quite the right length, actually when I smooth it down, it's perfectly fine. Okay, so make sure you're happy with that and your layers are nicely lined up, and then whichever side you want to be the right side, that's the side we're going to stitch on now. I also like to mark on my strap where to stop stitching at each end. So I am going to stop stitching 3/4 of an inch, 2 centimeters away from that seam, because I know my walking foot and the bulkiness of the back of it, and I know that these straps are neater when I finish at that distance. So that's the distance I'm going to use. If you're happy to use that distance as well, then that would be good. If not, sort of have a little play with the foot on your machine and see where you can go up to. We don't need to worry too much about stopping stitching 3/4 of an inch away. That's close enough for the ring to be held secure, but if you don't feel it is, you've also got space there to add a little rivet as well. Now, when I say stop stitching, we're not actually going to stop stitching, because we are going to sew around this strap in a bit of a rectangle. So let me move this so you can see the whole strap. So I'm going to start probably around here-ish, and I'm going to sew along this edge till I get to my line. Then I'm going to stop with my needle down, lift my presser foot and pivot. So along that line, stop my needle down, lift my presser foot, pivot. So along the long edge, along that short line, and back to where I started. Now, if you can't be completely accurate on your seam allowance on these short ends, on the lines, don't panic too much. Stop where you can, decrease your stitch length down, go to where you need to, stop your needle down, lift, press, foot, pivot, and then change your stitch length back up to your regular stitch length, okay? So don't panic too much. Right, so we are sewing with a 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance at this point, okay? So we're not sewing directly on the stitches we've already got. We're sewing 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And as you're putting this through the presser foot, just make sure that these two layers are lined up nice and even so that you'll be sewing them together. So they're as though they're one strap. Okay. Right, okay. Just to double check you've caught all the layers in your stitches. Looks good to me. And then you can rub out your chalk or whatever you used to make those marks. I might need to get a bit of water on those. Okay, trim any threads. Now, if you've modified this to use strap anchors or something like that, then or swivel clips, your strap is done. You are ready to go. I love that with the two-tone. It looks great, doesn't it? However, this one uses strap anchors. Strap tabs, fabric strap tabs. So I'll sew my fabric strap tabs and then we'll add them on to that strap. So my strap tabs are 2 inches by 3 inches. And I'm gonna draw a line 1 inch away from the long edge, so down the center really of those, because these are going into the seam, so I don't need to do fully enclosed strap tabs because they're going into the seam. Now all I'm going to do is just press each long edge into this center line. Let's fold that in and give it a little press. Bit of steam to help it. And then I'm going to do the second side as well, so that long edge comes into the center to meet the first edge. Okay. I'm going to sit that upside down so that as it cools down, it stays nice and flat. And those edges are not tempted to lift up. Do my second tab. I've chosen to do my strap tabs out of the lining fabric that's on the back of my strap, just for a bit of added interest, and also because my fabric is thinner. So thought of doing strap tabs out of my canvas and then attaching it to a canvas bag and a canvas strap. Didn't really fancy that, so I've gone for this thinner lining fabric for my strap tabs. Now on the right side, we're just going to sew along each long edge 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil away from the edge, and I'm using my top stitching stitch length still so that it matches my strap. And I'm sewing through both on both sides of my strap tab. Was a bit tight there. Okay. I find when you're sewing things that are on the short side like this, if you can chain them together, then your thread doesn't bunch up. Okay, so I've got my top stitching on both long edges and then my raw edges on the back. All I'm going to do now is thread this through these rectangle rings and then sew the ends together. I'm just doing 1/8 of an inch away. And that just keeps my tabs on. What I can do is change to my zip foot and sew as close to this ring as possible, and that will just prevent the ring twisting in the strap and the strap tab. Or alternatively, I could add a rivet to it, which I might do actually. I think that sounds quite nice. Okay, so let's see if my strap is on my bag like that, which side do I want? That side or that side? I think I want the other side. That's a bit nicer. Okay, there we go. So that is my fully enclosed fixed length strap with my strap tabs and my hardware attached. You can use this kind of strap on any bag where you want a fixed length strap, but all of your seam allowances, all of your joins, everything is all hidden inside. There's no bulkiness. You've only really got that seam at the end, and that's it. So I think this is a great strap option for loads of bags. So feel free to use this on any bag that you like. So the last thing we need to do to our exterior is just to attach our strap onto our bag. So all I'm going to do is just centre these strap tabs over these side seams that we've got, lining up these raw edges along the top, and just make sure, the only thing you need to be careful of on this one is to make sure that your strap is not twisted when you're lining these up. Okay, so before you sew this on, just double check that that is not twisted at all. And then all we're going to do is just baste this in the seam allowances. Just hold it in place while we finish construction. Okay, and I'm going to do that on both sides. Just making sure that my raw edges are lined up nicely along the top. Okay, lovely. Right, so that is a great bag, except it's a bit useless in the inside, isn't it? Because you haven't got anything nice in there, just the fleece. So you can pop that to one side for the minute, and let's get on with our lining. Right, so first thing we need is our zip pocket and one lining piece, so one main lining piece. Now before I start anything, I'm just going to double check that I've got this at 15 inches wide and 16 inches high before I accidentally sew this on the wrong way round. Otherwise, well, I suppose it would still be useful. I'd just have a sideways pocket, I guess. Right, okay. Ah, no, hang on. I've missed a step, missed a step. First thing we need to do is cut our bottom corners. So make sure, if you've got directional fabric, make sure that the top is further away from you. And make sure that these are indeed 15 inches wide. Good job, I just glanced at the pattern then, isn't it? Otherwise I'll be leading us astray. Right, first thing we are going to do then is cut out some bottom corners. So we need 2-inch bottom corners on this one. So I'm just going to line up my ruler. And just cut through both of these layers. Like so. Would have been a lot easier to have turned that, but instead I turned my hand. Okay, and then on the second corner as well. At least once you've got these corner cutouts done, then you know that you've got the pieces the right way round. Okay, so cut through both layers of this as well. Okay, right, now we can pop one of those to one side, and I'm trying to put it to one side flat so it doesn't get all creased, but it's, there we go, it's catching the wind, I think. Right, so I've got my zip, I've pre-steamed my zip, just double check that it's all good. I've got my zip pocket. So on the wrong side of my zip pocket, now if you've got directional fabric, then you want this to be upside down. Have I got directional fabric? Don't know, don't think it matters on my one, that's okay. Right, I'll use my pencil on this one. just so that I don't risk it showing through. So we're going to draw our line. The measurements for this are in your pattern. And then we're going to draw another line 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre above it. And I better mark the centres before we get started on this, so that I know everything is nicely lined up. Okay, we're going to make this box, well, 8 inches long the pattern calls for. Is my zip 8 inches long? Yes, it is. Excellent. Can't always tell, can you? Because 7 inches and 8 inches looks very similar. Okay. Right, so I've got my box drawn. And then, oh, hang on, I need to draw a triangle in each end. This is just a really basic zip pocket, and the only purpose of this zip pocket is so that you've got somewhere to put personal items when you're carrying all of your files or things, and also you can turn the bag through it and hide your turning gap. But if you want to change this for a different kind of pocket, feel free to do that. Right, so we're going to pop this on the bottom. I need a centre mark on my bottom so I can line it all up nice and neat. Now this bag doesn't have a top closure, it's just an open top tote, but if you want to add a magnetic snap or a zip or something, then you can do that before we sew everything together. Right, so we're going to place this 7 inches from the bottom, or 17.75 centimetres. Make sure that's nice and even. So I'm lining up the centre of my zip pocket with the centre of my lining panel. And I'm just going to add a couple of pins into the side here just to hold this in place while we're sewing. Okay. Now all we're going to do is sew around the outside of this box. So I like to start around about there and sew around the outside, and then as I approach the corner, if I need to, so that I can be really accurate on these corners, I'll reduce my stitch length right down, sew into the corner, stop with my needle down, lift my presser foot and pivot, sew along the short end. And again, if I need to drop my stitch length right down to be able to be accurate in those corners, then I can, and then change it back up again. So I'm going to start off with my regular stitch length, and if I need to decrease it to be accurate, then I can. But we're going to go around all 4 sides of this outside box. Okay, turn the corner. And then turn the corner again. Lovely. Right, first thing I'm going to do then is steam these stitches with my steam iron. Just make sure that it's nice and woken up. My iron does go to sleep sometimes. Okay. So just on the wrong side, I'm just going to give that a little press. And then I'm also going to pull the zip pocket away from the lining and just steam press along that stitch line there. And then I'm going to pull down away from the stitch line. And then the side, short side. And then the same on the other short side. So all 4 sides I've steamed away from the stitch line. Nice and neat. Okay, and then we can cut through this line in the center and along each triangle. So I'm going to cut along to the point of the triangle and then up each arm or each leg or each side of the triangle as close as I can to these stitches without cutting through the stitches. Okay, and then I'm going to go along this center line to the point and along each line of the triangle. Okay, lovely. Now we can push this zip pocket through the lining to the back, give it a good tug, and then I'm going to press from the right side. Now it seems like you would probably want to press from the wrong side first to get it to sit nice and flat, but trust me, if you press from the right side, then any creases or puckers you get in the corners will be hidden on the inside of your zip pocket. Okay, so I always press from the right side first. Nice steam press to get that top side sitting nice and flat. And then I'm gonna finger roll the bottom bit. I'll tuck it down from inside and give that a nice finger press along the bottom. And along the sides as well. So on this side, on the lining main panel side, it's nice and neat and all quite crisp. Nice neat opening. And then on the wrong side, might be a few puckers around these corners, and if there are, that's completely fine because nobody's going to see them because they'll be inside your zip pocket. And if they're looking inside your zip pocket in that much detail, always like to make you aware that they should not be on your friends list if they're looking inside your pocket. Right, okay, so we need some double-sided tape now. And we're just going to add a line of tape to the top and bottom edges of this zip box opening on the pocket side. Okay. And I can peel the backing paper off of that then. And we're going to add our zip on to the wrong side. And this is just going to keep our zip in place while we sew it in. Okay. Now I like to know where the metal stopper bits of my zip are, so I always make sure that they're in the window, but if you prefer those to be hidden, then just adjust it how you prefer. So just kind of pop it in and then I turn it over to the right side and realise I've done it terribly wonky, and readjust from the right side and just lift that up, straighten it out, and then press it down to adhere it into place. Okay. Now we're going to sew around the outside of the zip box. I'm going to start I usually start down here, but because I've got green thread, I wonder if maybe I might start a little bit nearer to the end so that it is a little bit hidden. But I like to start around about there because I find it's not that noticeable. So we're going to sew 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from this edge of the zip box, and we're going to sew all the way around. And the same as we did before, if you're getting close to the corner but not quite accurate, then do change your stitch length down however you need to be able to get really nice and neat and accurate into the corner. Okay, yeah, I'm going to start around about there-ish, I think, because that'll hide the start of my seam. So I'm not going to back stitch, but I am going to go back over my original first few stitches when I come back around to this point at the end. Okay, so as I approach my zip pull, I'm just lifting my presser foot with my needle down, unzip the zip, and then lower my presser foot and keep going. And we're back round to the start. Okay, lovely, that goes really well actually. That's a nicely matched zip. Open your zip at least halfway at this point, okay, and never close it again. Well, not until the end. And then on the wrong side, all we're going to do is bring this top of the zip pocket down to meet the bottom of the zip pocket. Okay, bring them down so they match, because it will give you a little bit of extra wiggle space at the top then. So don't bring it down so it's right on this line here, because they won't match. Bring them down to match, and then you've got this extra little bit of give in the top of your pocket so that it will be able to contain whatever you put in there. Won't stretch it out of shape. Now I'm only pinning through the zip pocket layers, and when I sew, I'm only going to sew through the zip pocket layers. I'm not going to sew through the lining main panel layers. And on this one, we're going to sew, we're going to start at the tops and back stitch, sew to around about here-ish and back stitch, and then I'm going to baste across those 2 points there. So I'm going to use my regular stitch length and back stitching at the start and the end of these two side bits and a little bit onto the bottom. And then I'm just going to baste using my longest stitch along the bottom here. I'm going to steam those stitches, and then I'm going to take them out, and that will be our turning gap for the whole bag. We're going to turn the bag through that turning gap. Okay, so when we sew, just sewing on the layers of the zip pocket. Okay, back stitch. Now I've increased my stitch length. Okay, decrease my stitch length again. And carry on to the end. Right, so we'll take these pins out, and I'm just going to steam press these stitches, these basting stitches, before I go any further, so that I know I've done that. When we come to turn the bag through, I don't have to worry and think, did I do that? Did I not? I've done it. Okay. Now I'm going to leave those basting stitches in for the minute. It's no harm to do that. I've opened my zip up a bit more. And before I go any further, I am going to add my little handmade label, just so that I don't forget, because I bought 100 absolutely years and years and years ago, and I've still got so many left that I really need to start using them. So I'm going to try and put them in every bag that I make. Oh, hang on, something's caught with my walking foot. There we go. Right, okay, so our lining is ready to sew together now, and we can just get going on our lining. Right, we're very nearly finished now, so all we need to do is sew our lining together. So lay one on top of the other, matching all the raw edges, matching these corner cutouts and sides and bottoms and things. I'm going to add a few clips. Okay. So we can sew the bottom side. That's nicely matching up. My sides are not. Let's match those up. There we go. Glad I put my label in there. Glad I didn't forget. Okay, and I'll just smooth this side out so it's matching. Just got my zip pocket there, pulling things slightly out of shape, I think. Right, so we are going to sew around all three sides, leaving these corner cutouts open. So we're going to sew along the side edge, bottom edge, and the other side edge. We're going to use our regular stitch length, regular seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre, and I'm going to back stitch at the start and end of every seam. Right, lovely. Okay. Now, something I forgot to mention to you is we started at our 3/8 of an inch seam allowance here, and then we should have tapered to a 1/2 inch for this middle bit, and then tapered back to our 3/8 of an inch at the bottom, and I forgot to do that, so I'm going to do that now. So I'm going to start in my original stitching line, and then I'm just going to taper to a 1/2 inch or 1.2 mil. And then I've just tapered back to my original seam allowance there. Okay. I'm just doing this to make sure that any any excess in the lining is just taken out and the lining fits really snug. This just takes into account the extra bulk on the exterior where we've got that fleece. Okay, right, so let's press open our seam allowances as best we can. If you can't do all of them, then just do the bottom bit and the top bit, but if you can do all of them, then that will give you a really lovely neat finish. Okay, so I've folded one side back, and I'm going to fold the second side back. Fold the rest. I'm also going to fold back the seam allowances on my bottom seam as well, because this will give us a really nice neat finish inside. It's all these extra little steps, just little things, but they give you a really nice neat finish then because you've done them. So I would say they were worth doing. Okay, and then on to this final side. I'll press the side open first. Fold it back and do the second side. It's a little bit more long-winded, and if you're in a rush, you might want to skip this step, but I do think it's worth doing if you can. It'll give you a much neater finish inside anyway. Okay. Right, okay, so once those are opened, what we're going to do is we're going to bring the side seam to meet the bottom seam, and we're going to match these seam lines here in the middle and add a clip, and then just flatten these bits out, and this will give us our boxed corner on the lining. Okay, and then on the other side we'll just bring the side seam to meet the bottom seam. Just pull these fabrics wherever you need them to be. Make sure that those seams are matching the side and the bottom. Add a couple of clips. Okay, and then we're just going to sew those. We're just going to use our regular 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre seam allowance, and back stitching at the start and the end. And the same on this one. Okay. Right, so that's our lining finished. Just have a little look inside to check you're happy with it. Check it looks nice and neat. Yep, looks great. Okay, and then we need to retrieve our exterior. Mine is on the floor, hang on. Okay, I've got it. Phew. Okay, double check that your zip is still open. Yes, it's still open. Okay, great. Now, we are going to put the exterior inside the lining like this. So the lining is wrong side out and the exterior is right side out. So these are right sides together, matching each other. And then, oh, I think I can hear the road sweeper outside. Sorry if it's a bit noisy. I think you can probably hear that on the video, sorry. They might be emptying the drain outside. Perfect timing, eh? Right, all I'm doing is matching up the side seams and clipping those. And if you did actually mark the centres of all of your pieces like it says to in the pattern at the start, then this bit will be super easy. If like me you didn't, you're gonna have to ease it into place. So all we're doing is just matching up along the tops. All the way around. And then we're going to sew around the entire top, just using our regular seam allowance. Actually, if I put that clip there, then I can start around about there-ish, can't I? Now, if you haven't got a free arm like me, then you're going to have to sew inside your bag. So all you need to do is just pop your presser foot inside and sew like this. Don't be afraid to just move your fabric out of the way as you need to. Now, because I'm using canvas, I'm just going to go back over my side seams where my tabs are, just to make sure that's nice and strong. Because I can see this one being loaded up because it's that slightly sturdier fabric. Right, now I'm just going to add a dab of fray check to those bits where I've just secured the strap tabs as well. And this is not in the pattern, this is not something that you need to do unless you suspect particularly heavy use in these areas. So I suspect that the recipient of this is going to carry quite heavy things, so I'm just safeguarding against any splitting there. Right, okay, so now all we need to do is open these basting stitches along the bottom of our zip pocket. We already steamed them earlier, so we know that we are good to go. Just unpick these, and as you unpick these, you'll see a little line of stitch holes along that seam line. That'll just give us something to follow then when we turn our seam allowances under, ready to close this turning gap. Okay. Right, and just take this extra thread off the back where we've undone those stitches. Okay, now we're going to reach through this hole in the bottom of the zip pocket and grab the bottom of the exterior part. Just start gently turning this right side through. Now this shouldn't be too bad because you haven't got huge amounts of heavy stabilizer in here. You've just got some nice fleece which is amenable and bendy. Okay, get everything turned right sides out. Make sure your strap tabs are pointing the way they should be pointing. Get rid of any extra threads. Bit of extra thread there. Okay, and then we can tuck this back inside. Right, okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to finger roll. So I'm just make sure that all my zip and everything is all inside. I'm just going to finger roll the top seam here to make sure that this top seam is really, really well turned out. Go all the way along, so I'm just finger rolling it and clipping it. If you have got a really nice big ironing board next to you, then I would recommend giving this a good press rather than just finger rolling and clipping. But unfortunately I am limited on space here, so I'm just going to finger roll and clip, and then I am going to go back and give it a good press afterwards. But by finger rolling, I'm just making sure that the seam is exactly where it needs to be and everything is turned out. And then on these side seam bits, you can reach inside, make sure that seam allowance is still open, and then fold it down. There we go, that's lovely. Just double check this seam allowance over here, check that's still opened out inside. Yeah, you'll find that it's much more bulky if it's not opened out inside, so that is something worth double checking. Right, now if you've got a free arm, then you can just pop this on and sew around that entire top on the right side using your top stitching length. But because I've got a flatbed, I'm going to turn mine inside out, so I'm still sewing on the outside or the exterior fabric of the bag, but I'm sewing from inside the bag. Okay, now we are going to sew using a 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance, so 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the top of this bag. I'm going to start with my needle down so that if I need to lift my presser foot or lift my hands at any point, then it's still secured under the machine with the needle. I'm using my top stitching length, stitch length, and I'm going to sew around the entire top. Right, so, oh, let's snip a few loose threads before I go any further. They always come back to haunt me if I don't catch them there and then. Right, so if you're happy with your top stitch and you're happy with how that all looks, then all we need to do is just pull our zip pocket out. And yours will be inside your bag, obviously, unless you've got your bag inside out like me. And we're just gonna fold along those stitch holes. So do you remember when we took those stitches out, it left a row of stitch holes? So we're just gonna fold along the stitch holes. And all the way along, fold under on both sides. And then I can just clip it. Now you can either use a really close machine stitch, so by close I mean so really close to the edge, or you can use a hand ladder stitch. Now I absolutely hate hand sewing, so I am going to use a machine stitch, and I'm going to sew really close to the edge of my fabric here. And I'm going to use my regular stitch length. Now this will be inside your zip pocket, so don't worry too much about it being seen. You just don't want anything to go missing in the lining of your bag through this hole. Okay, right, yep, I checked both, caught both sides on that, so that's good. Let's trim these extra threads. Okay, right, so now I better turn my bag right side out if I'm going to use it. I think it could work pretty well as a reversible bag though, don't you, actually? If you fancy it, you could use it as a reversible bag. Work pretty well. Right, so smooth everything down inside, zip up that zip pocket, poke out these bottom corners on the exterior, make sure your bottom corners on the lining are nicely pushed out into the bottom corners. And then all you need to do is give it one final press, and that's it, your bag is done. I'm really quite chuffed with that. I think that looks great. I love the exposed corners. I love the two-tone strap on it. I think that looks great. And I also love that there's not much to get in the way when I'm sliding my files and my folders in and out of this bag on my way to my meetings. So I have really enjoyed sewing this bag. I think it's been a really pleasant sew. It's been nice and quick and very satisfying. I hope you've enjoyed sewing your bag as well, and I can't wait to see what you make. Please do tag me at Sewing Patterns by Mrs H, or email us mrsh@mrs-h.com if you'd like to show us what you make. Thanks for sewing with me. Bye bye.